Across America, you're listening to the Veterans Impact Show, featuring stories of veterans who continue the mission in their communities with honor, courage, and commitment. Brought to you by Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce.
Can't turn that around.
Welcome. You're on board with Jim Blythe and Chuck Wright. This is the Veterans Impact Show, and we're going to have a lot of fun today. We're going to be talking to a very dear friend of mine, Dave Carey, U.S. Navy captain, Vietnam POW, a survivor. But before we do that, there's a couple of news items that I would like to talk about. We mourn the passing of a commander who was an ace in World War II, the only man to shoot down both Japanese and German planes. Commander Dean Laird was 101 years old, and he passed away just very, very recently. So we remember a great ace, Navy commander, shot down both German and Japanese. Also, my good friend, Dr. Stephen Holt, sent me a note. The PACT Act has passed. So if you want to know more about the PACT Act and the burn pit, as well as Agent Orange and all the things the VA is trying to do and doing to help you, then just go to va.gov, the resources, and look up the PACT Act for your VA benefits. And that's something you need to take a look at and you need to know about. All right, Chuck, I just introduced you a minute ago to a great man, Dave Carey. Let me tell you a little bit about Dave Carey. I met him in San Diego in, I think, 2011. And you were the featured speaker at a reunion of my squadron, VA 163. And you sat next to my wife, quite frankly. And
Can't say that I blame him.
And we were so amazed at your story of surviving the Oriskany fire and surviving being a POW. Tell me, when you go way back, what motivated you to be an A4 pilot? What motivated you to be a Navy officer?
Well, Jim, first of all, I'm delighted to be with you this morning. I'm trying to think about how I tell you these stories in a short order because I'm to the point in my life where there are no more sound bites. Everything's kind of a story. So I grew up in a little town in Pennsylvania, and when I was a junior in high school, I decided I wanted to go to college. And let me tell you, there's a lot to be said for making a decision because my grades got way better. Everything got way better. And I also played football. And so I was recruited to go to the Naval Academy by the recruiting coach at that time, who was Bill Belichick's dad, Steve Belichick. So I went to the Naval Academy purely because my dad was a truck driver. I wanted to go to college, and somebody had to pay for this, and I didn't know where the money was going to come from, and it was the best offer I had. It was a complete full ride, as you know, with an obligation attached to it. And I thought, that's fine. I think I'll like the Navy, and so that got me in the Navy. And then during the summers, while I was at the Naval Academy, you go various places. And one summer was an aviation summer, and so I was introduced to flying. And that's when I decided I wanted to fly. And so that was sort of the evolution. It was not something that was thought out and planned, and, you know, my whole life was lined up this way. It was just kind of, you know, if I really want to be candid with you, it was kind of God leading me step by step to, in a way that I discovered I wanted to go.
And you were a grade A4 pilot. If people on Facebook will take a look at the picture behind you, those are two TA4s from our squadron with the blue tail. Yeah. Did you take that picture, or was that Mule's picture?
To tell you the truth, I don't know who took the picture, but they are both A4s. They're both Echoes, and they are from our squadron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things, in 1966, the Oriskany had a terrible fire. Yeah. You were caught in the berthing compartment and woken, and you survived that fire, and you managed to get out of that. Everybody thought you were a goner.
Yeah.
So tell us a quick story about that, what that was like, surviving that fire.
Yeah, well, back in those days, we were dumber than a box of rocks. And when they had fire drills, we just kind of ignored them, we in the air wing. So the fire alarm went off in the morning. It was very early. I don't know what time exactly. And they're yelling, fire, fire, fire. And I just rolled over in my bunk. And I happened to look at the door to my compartment, and there was smoke coming under the door. There was a white coming under the door. And I thought, whoa, maybe this is for real. So I got up, got dressed, and put on my flight suit. When I opened that door and stepped into the passageway, literally, it was like stepping into a bag of flour. It was, I can't even describe it. It was like being in a totally white world. I couldn't see anything. And I only knew, this was how dumb we were. I only knew how to get from my stateroom to the ready room, to the flight deck, to the air intelligence spaces, and to food. So the only thing I knew was to come out and turn right and head for the hangar deck. Well, that, of course, headed me towards where the fire was coming from. And what happened, as you know, was that these magnesium phosphorus flares, as they were downloading them, one of them went off in the flare locker, and the ship's ventilation system was pumping all this white phosphorus smoke powder into the ventilation system. And as I'm working my way back, I bumped this hatch open, a door opened, and I bumped into it. And this voice said, "Come on in here, it's clear." So I go in and down a couple steps into the ship's administrative office, which had its own separate little air conditioner, which probably was illegal, I don't know, but it wasn't attached to the ship's system. And so there were two sailors in there. So now there are two sailors and me, and we're trying to get on the phones and find our way out. We tried at one point to walk out, but we got into that smoke, and I knew within a few feet that we were not going to make it to the hangar deck. It was too far. And ultimately, what happened is this stuff starts seeping into the space, and we are laying on the floor because it's the clearest air. When the hatch opened and in came a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy, a fellow named Jim Nunn, with his scuba gear on. And he had his tanks on his back and his faceplate on. And he hollers in there, "Is anybody in here?" And we, of course, yes. And he's got a couple of those gas mask things that you see in the movies. And we put those on. The two sailors went aft to the hangar deck, and Jim and I then went forward looking for other people. We went all the way forward to where there was a passageway across the ship. And I finally told Jim, I got to go get some air. I'm so full of this stuff. I've got to get out of here. And so we went back. I went back to hangar deck, and I crawled up on the flight deck. And just like you said, everybody was like amazed to see me. They thought I guess they thought I was dead. We lost 43 people in that fire, and what I've just described to you took about 5 hours.
Wow, that you had another really bad day though in your next cruise in 1967, and without going into great detail, you got shot down over North Vietnam.
I did.
And I remember of your story so many times, Dean Kramer saying, "We can't come get you, buddy. We'll see you when the war's over."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excuse me. Just thinking about all that smoke tightened me up.
Yeah, that'll do it.
So very, very quickly again, you were captured, you were beaten, you were stripped, you were taken to Hanoi, and then you were tortured. And that was the start of 5.5 years in Hanoi as a POW. Dave, that is one of the most amazing stories, and we have on Facebook. your book, Dave Carey's story, and the ways we choose. What I think is this book should be read by every high school student, everybody who wants to study history, because it's a book about not only what happened, but how you guys thrived and survived. Truly amazing. How did you communicate with one another?
Well, the Vietnamese wanted us to be isolated cell by cell by cell. They kind of believed in divide and conquer, and somehow we knew we couldn't allow that to happen. And so we devised, but we had a lot of ways that we communicated. The primary way was by tapping on the wall. And we devised a code. If you picture in your mind a 5x5 matrix, and we put the letters of the alphabet in there, use the letter C for the letter K, then we would tap a number across the top and a number down the side, locate a letter in the matrix. And we used that code. That code was good. We'd go about 30 words a minute. We were the original text messengers. We'd use it for everything. And that was our primary method. Then we had other ways of communicating. We had a one-handed alphabet. If you could see somebody, it would be A, B, C, D. We had a two-handed alphabet if you were far away, kind of like YMCA. And we just devised all sorts of methods to be in touch with each other and to communicate with each other, not only about things that were important and serious, but the mundane and to tell jokes and just take care of each other and help each other get through this thing.
You know, it's amazing. And Chuck, you haven't heard this story. You did read the book. One of the things is you guys worked together to thrive, and you became the French teacher, and you became a concert pianist.
That's right. I did. I was if I were really to get real serious about describing my situation, it was just like this definition of flying, where the definition says flying is hours and hours of boredom interspersed with moments of sheer terror. And that's kind of the way my experience there was. It was hours and hours and days of being locked up, interspersed by moments of sheer terror. And in those hours and hours and days and months, we decided that we were going to come out of there smarter than we went in. We were going to learn something. And so we taught each other everything we'd ever learned and a bunch of things we had never learned. I did learn to play the piano. I lived with a fellow taking piano lessons as a child. We decided I should learn to play. We made a piano keyboard out of toilet paper, drew on it with ashes and dirt. And then John taught me how to read the piano keyboard, taught me how to read music, taught me all the finger exercises to go along with it. And I would practice faithfully on that little paper piano. And on Sundays, I would give concerts.
Nice.
And I would take that piano of mine and I'd spread it out in my end of that cell. And I have played some of the most beautiful music in the world. And I've most certainly played with more enthusiasm than anyone's ever played. And my cellmates, they loved it, of course.
That's great stuff, Dave.
Yeah.
I wanted to share this. I had the absolute honor. It was pure happenstance. I was Sam Johnson's last constituent visit. It was not planned. It was not set up. As he stepped down from being a congressman, and Congressman Johnson's not with us anymore. He's an Air Force veteran who is also in the Hanoi Hilton. Just an incredible man. What do we got? We've got about 40 seconds before we're going to take our first radio break. But I grew up as an Air Force brat. I had one of my classmates, her father was in fact, Kay Fleener's father was a POW over there. Ken yes. Yeah. So you know him. So what?
I think
I got 30 seconds and you want to interrupt.
Well, when we come back, we want to talk about this and the motivation that you guys learned, exhibited, and what you did to not only just survive, but to thrive, and how that has continued the mission in your life. So this is Jim Blythe and Chuck Wright. We are the Veterans Impact Show. We'll be right back. I want to be talking about your books, because that's going to be where people can really go learn this story and then they can come back and go, wow, yeah, your book and your DVD. That's amazing.
And Dave, we're still live on Facebook, which will be part of the YouTube. So we don't really stop the show. We just insert these little breaks that for our terrestrial radio audience.
Well, Dave has been a frequent visitor to our program and has been a fantastic, as well as speaker. Dave, you do a lot of public speaking, motivational teaching. You've also been so great to come up and speak to our Navy League. You speak around the world, matter of fact, from what I understand. And people can get a hold of you by going to davecarey.com, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I have a website, and that's another whole story, how I got into the speaking business, but that's where I've been for years and years and years now.
Well, let's focus on that in the next segment coming back. What you're doing now to continue the mission.
Absolutely, and that's the show is built around the concept of Charlie Mike, continue the mission, and what we've tried to do with the show is feature those who have continued that leadership. And it's really interesting because when we come back with our regular radio listeners, it's one thing I want to drill into a little bit is the motivation. Admiral Stockdale talked about it in his book, the things that you did to keep yourself, to learn to be a concert pianist in a cell with literally no piano, no nothing. I mean, you're making the keyboard out of toilet paper, and these stories were so incredible to me. Listening to the people I knew, as when I was in the Marine Corps, several of the POWs were still on active duty. I did not know Ken Fleener, Kay Fleener's dad. She was a classmate. So one of the things that I love about Facebook is I have connected with 30 or 40 classmates, and it's funny that we weren't really close back then, but we realize how much we have in common now. But to get to know people like you, the positive of the internet, we can talk about a lot of its negatives, but there are a lot of positives, and that's what we want to drill into when we come back from our break. And how much time will we get, Jim?
About a minute.
We got about a minute, so we're kind of vamping a little bit here.
Well, that's
stuff
fun.
for Facebook.
Man, I got to tell you, the weather blew through. It rained, and it brought, I think, a whole lot of mountain cedar that's messing with my sinuses.
I just think he's getting old.
Aw. Aw.
Look at the bright side. You're not getting older any faster than the rest of us are.
Yeah, but I'm getting better as I get older.
Dave, I got to say, when you were talking about describing flying, when I went through OCS, our company commander, and I think I only saw him once or twice for the company, was an A4 driver, and he came in one time, and we had a third of our class, I think, were on aviation contracts, and it was the exact same description that he gave.
Yeah, I think the A4 was the Porsche of what we had in the fleet to fly in Vietnam. It was fun.
Oh, yeah.
I got to fly in the back seat for quite a while, and that was of the TA4. All right, we're going to be going. Here we go.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. Thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Now, let's continue this conversation.
Hey, and before we jump into this,
Yeah.
always forget to do this. But this doesn't happen without our incredible crew behind the scenes. Nathaniel Smith of Ascend. It's Ascend Podcast. Yes, Ascend Podcast does an incredible job, has definitely upped the show significantly. And the lovely Mrs. Diane Blythe, who is our Facebook producer, I guess you would call her. I don't know what your title is. Jim always forgets to introduce the people who really make this happen, because trust me, the two of us together couldn't figure out the technology behind this.
Boy, that's for sure.
I just sit over here and sip on my Dunkin' Donuts
Yeah.
coffee and wonder why they're not sponsoring the show.
Okay, Dave, we're talking with Dave Carey, Vietnam POW, United States Navy captain, retired, survived the Oriskany fire, survived being a POW. You've got a website. You've got your books. We've got those up for Facebook, The Ways We Choose. I've read them. They're incredible. I give them out. I gave out a whole box of 40 of them that you gave me. And
Not one of them autographed.
Yeah, well, next time. But let's continue talking about those lessons that you learned in Hanoi. You were talking about being a concert pianist. How about being the consummate French teacher?
Well, yeah. So part of passing the time over there was to begin any and every kind of educational program that we could think of. And the way the French came about was one day they came in and they took two of us out and split us up and began to beat on us. And they told us they had a guard listening outside the door, and he heard us talking about things we weren't allowed to talk about. Well, so 6 weeks later, when they dumped the two of us back in the cell, and the cellmates want to know what's going on, we say, you ain't going to believe this. They're listening outside these doors, and they don't understand English very well, and we're getting hammered for what they think we're saying. So then we came to the only logical conclusion, which was we'll quit speaking English. And the first thing we decided to speak was Pig Latin. Now, I don't know if you've ever spoken nothing but Pig Latin, but I can tell you, you can do it for about 4 hours before you go crazy. And in the middle of that, I let slip that I had taken French. I had 2 years in high school, 2 years at the Naval Academy. And my roommates who were going crazy trying to speak Pig Latin, decided we should immediately shift to French. And
Well, and it's interesting that you picked French, considering the French had ruled Vietnam for so long as a colony.
That's correct.
And you would think they would have plenty of people in there that spoke French.
They had a few, and a couple of the officers, the older officers, did speak French. They probably had a lot in the country, but only a few that we were exposed to. And so I began to teach French, and I taught French for years. By the time we came back to the United States, by the way, in those 4 years that I took French, I didn't learn anything. It was like, so I'm making stuff. So when we came home, I had 6 men fluent in the French language, according to me.
So you went from speaking Pig Latin to teaching Pig French.
That's about the size of it. That's right. Because I made up stuff that I didn't. You know, there are problems with that French language. I just had to make stuff up.
You mean besides the fact that the French speak it?
Well, I don't know if that's.
Yeah. But I think one of the cool things is you guys are motivating each other. You're learning. You're using your
That's
brains.
right.
One of the
That's
things
right.
a lot of people don't realize, unless they study history, of all of the wars and all of the POWs we have, going back, my uncle, Jimmy, was a POW in Germany during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've had more POWs thrive and go forward. Men like Sam Johnson, men like Stockdale, you, Dave, many more who not only written books, but they became CEOs and became, you know, they really thrived. And I think it was because you guys did so much in there to lift each other up, to really strengthen and educate and do. And I think this is an amazing thing that when adversity comes, you rise up above it. You learn from it. It becomes a challenge. And I think that's the important thing about your book and why I keep telling people, go to Dave's site, go to Amazon, get a copy of this book. It's important. And I'll get one from Chuck. Make sure you use a red Crayola, though.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
Autograph it, or he won't understand. All right, we're going to be coming back after this word from our partners, talking with Dave Carey, Vietnam POW, not just a survivor, but a thriver, a man who's gone on, and we're going to talk about that when we come back, to be a nationally and international speaker, motivator, author, writer, and a really great friend. And Chuck, I'm sorry, we'll use a bright red Crayola for you to autograph that book.
Thank you. The book that you didn't get autographed for me before.
I'll get it done. I'll get it done. Well, thank you, and thank you for staying with us, and we'll be right back in a minute from all of our partners. This is the Veterans Impact Show.
Dave, one of the questions I want to ask you, and then as we come back from the break, I want to transition to what you've done since then. Talk a little bit, and this I may be asking a real personal question, but I'm a Marine, so again, I'll ask for forgiveness, not permission. What was the initial transition? How long did it take you to feel, I hate to use the word normal, because I hate to support that political group that supports marijuana. Oh, sorry, that was a bad joke. Nobody knows much what normal is anymore. Probably went over most people's heads. But talk a little bit about what it was like for you. And obviously you stayed in the Navy.
Yep.
Talk about your transition, your immediate transition after the Hanoi Hilton.
Well, Chuck, here, let me tell you. Let me put it this way, okay? When we talk about my 5.5 years, we're talking about 5.5 years.
Yep.
We're talking about 9 years of Everett's life. And in September of 1969, there was a bit of a transition. Not much, but a little bit. And the transition was, it went from being open season on Americans to they obviously had to go somewhere and get permission to beat on us or really mess with us. And so that relieving of that little bit of pressure made a big difference in our lives. And I would tell you now, I would never have thought of these words years and years ago, but I will tell you now that I think in those cells, after that change in our treatment, we were doing group therapy. Now, I never would have thought of those words, but you just picture this. Here's a group of 5, 6, 8, 9, 20 guys locked up 24/7, month after month after month. We could talk about anything we wanted and for as long as we wanted. And then we could talk about it again and again. And so I believe that when we came back, the vast, vast majority of us were ready to hit the deck running. And we had processed what had happened to us so many times in so many ways that we were ready to move on. Now, I'm not saying we haven't had a few problems. We had a couple guys commit suicide, and we've had a few guys with problems. But the Naval Aerospace Medical Institute in Pensacola, where we've been going for physicals and shrink checks for ever since '74, would tell you that the vast, vast majority of the ex-POWs from Vietnam did not just survive, they thrived.
Wow,
they've thrived
incredible.
Ever since.
And I think that's the part of your story that is so important to share now. It's going through something as traumatic as that. And thriving. Now, I'm curious, did you go back to flying?
Yes. 6 weeks after I was released, I got married. 6 months after I was released, I was back in the cockpit flying.
Wow. Were you flying A4s again?
I flew A4s for the next 10 years out of Miramar in San Diego.
Ah.
Yeah.
So you were one of the guys who was, I guess if you'd just gotten married, you weren't hanging out at the Miramar O Club.
Not much.
All right, here we go.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. Thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Now, let's continue this conversation.
You're on board with the Veterans Impact Show with two great sailors and a Marine. Oh, well, we can't all be perfect, right, Chuck?
Hey, dude, I've got almost as much sea time, maybe more than you do.
Well, so then you qualify.
Be careful with that. I did 2 Westpac deployments, so I've got a year. And in fact, I do have, than some of my Navy friends, retired Navy friends, I have more sea time than they do.
How about that? I knew you were a great guy.
Yeah, there we go. I hung out with the Navy a lot, and I was an Air Force brat before that. So I grew up during the era that you were a resident and racking up your Hanoi Hilton points, I wonder if the Hilton has ever considered giving you guys credit for all of that time, considering all the free advertising they've got from it. I'm always working some angle.
That is actually a good. I've never thought of that.
There
I
we
think
go.
I'm going to write to the Hilton Honors Program and see what I can stir up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 5.5 years in a Hilton. I mean, really. But
There
one
we
of the
go.
things we were talking about on the break for Facebook is that you guys were actually working together, locked up, and there was a transition. Could you tell us that kind of briefly, what you talked about on Facebook?
If we pictured my experience on a timeline from when I was shot down the end of August 67 till when we were released in the spring of 73, in the fall of 1969, there was a slight change in our treatment. And the change was that before that time, it was open season on Americans. You go to interrogation, it was going to go like this: A, B, C, D, somebody's going to get a beating, and it was not going to be the interrogator. After that time, they'd go to interrogation, go A, B, C, D, and whoops, time not, King's X. And it became obvious to us that the interrogator had to go get permission to beat on us. And occasionally he would get permission to beat on us, but most of the time you'd just sit there for a while and eventually they'd lock you back up. So they relieved a little bit of that constant pressure, the threat of physical violence all the time. And that made a huge difference in our lives. And as I said earlier, so I would tell you now, I would never have said these words. They would never even have come into my mind back then. But I would tell you now that from that time in fall of 69 on, I think we were doing group therapy in those cells.
And you made a statement that down in Pensacola, the medical unit that you, after 74, you started going to, that the POWs of Hanoi did more to thrive than any other group of POWs. Was that fair statement?
Yeah, I think that if you ask the folks at Naval Air Medical Institute, they would tell you that the ex-Vietnam POWs did not just survive that experience, they thrived on that experience, and the vast, vast majority of them have thrived ever since.
And when you're going through adversity, Chuck, and you've been there, I've been there in life, the ways we choose, how we deal with that adversity, we can either rise up to the occasion or we can fall flat on our face. You did have a couple of guys who fell on their face, but most of you came forward. And that motivated you. Is that what motivated you to write this great book?
Well, not exactly, but it's a great book. What motivated me was I became a professional speaker. And if you're a professional speaker and you're published, you can raise your fees. So it was strictly a monetary thing for me. However, when I decided to start speaking, I sat down I can picture this perfectly in my mind. I sat down with my wife and I said, I got to decide what was worth talking about from that experience that's transferable to people's lives, because I don't just want to tell stories. And so I believe that my experience is an analogy for dealing with problems, change, an uncertain future, pressure in your life, choices you have to make. The list goes on and on and on. And when I speak, I tell the story, but I keep relating it to people's lives or businesses, what I know is going on with them. And I tell them, the question I most frequently ask is, how did you do that? How could you do that? How could you do that for 5.5 years? And my answer to that question is really very simple, and it's this: we did what we had to do. We did our best. We grew through that experience. We kept our sense of humor, and we kept the faith. Faith in ourselves, faith in each other, faith in our country, and faith in God. And I see those things that I just ran through as directly translatable into everybody's lives, professionally and personally. I mean, how do you deal with your problems? How do you deal with there's going to be tragedy in your life. How are we going to deal with all these things? And do we do what we have to do? Do we do our best? Do we keep our sense of humor? Are we growing? Do we keep the faith? So, I know your theme has become the mission continues, and I see that as the continuation of my mission. It's not just to tell war stories. It's not just to tell horror stories. It is to talk about what can be learned from my background in particular that is transferable to people's lives, professionally and personally.
And you speak around the world.
Yeah, I have spoken in several other countries. You're right.
I got a sneaking suspicion there was another sea story that just popped up in your mind. That is, you're doing that. So, and I've got two questions, and let's start with, so in the years between you getting out of the Hanoi Hilton and retiring from the Navy, share with us your fondest memory, your biggest accomplishment, the one thing you look at that you are the most proud of before you ended your career. And then I really want to go into that transition to the civilian world, to being a slimy civilian, as I call them.
Well, as I look back on my career, I really would tell you that probably the aside from the flying, first of all, the flying I loved.
Oh, yeah.
I love the flying. Okay.
Just the flying.
Next to the flying, I'm going to tell you, I loved being in command. I loved working with sailors. I loved working with the folks I had command of a couple of squadrons in the Naval Amphibious School, and I loved every minute of it. It was the most challenging, rewarding, fun thing that I've ever done is to work in areas of leadership with people, particularly with people who are in the United States military.
We have heard that several times on the show, and you're absolutely right. I'm not going to go into. I've got a story, but we'll share that personally because it'll take a little bit too long. But the things that you can do to positively impact young people, and we'll talk about this in the last segment. Jim and I talk about it a lot, the opportunities that the military presents for people to open their eyes, to give them opportunities to do stuff. You've got young people, and I think about I've got a friend of mine's son he's actually a client of mine, and he is now a Bradley tank commander. As a 20 or 21-year-old young man, he has responsibility for a multi-million-dollar tank. And Jim and I have talked to employers about this. We've had them on the show, and they're like, well, why would I hire a veteran? I said, you're talking about young people who at an incredibly early age have been given a level of responsibility that understand how to make decisions, how to get a job done, as opposed to somebody who may know the job, but every time something comes up, they're going to run to you and go, well, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? Our veterans generally don't have that problem. They just get it done. So, if you will, Dave, talk a little bit about, as you transitioned out, because you've talked about being a speaker, what got you started with that? And talk a little bit about and I'm going to drill deeper into the message that you want to relay.
Okay. Well, so it kind of started with my last job in the Navy. When I was sent to Naval Amphibious School in Coronado, San Diego, California, and
I've spent the night in that BOQ several times.
Yeah. Well, I was sent there to run a leadership and management training program for prospective commanding officers and executive officers.
Oh.
And when I got there, the black shoe captain retired all of a sudden. And so they offered me the command, which I, of course, accepted. So I had command of the place. But that was a very eye-opening experience for me. Just the idea that people study these things and there are theories and all of that kind of stuff. So when I left the Navy, well, the short version is this: I didn't want to work for anybody. I mean, even in the Navy, a humongous organization, when I had command, I was very much on my own. As long as I was doing my job, I never talked to my bosses unless I wanted to go talk to them about something. They just left me alone to do my job. And so I decided, it's a longer story, but I decided to go into business for myself. I decided I would do some consulting and training, which I've been doing for 30 years. I work on people stuff, how people work together. And I also was encouraged to do some speaking. And I told you about sitting down with my wife and deciding what was worth learning from my experience. And so that's what got me started on that. And it was, I really do see it, and I have seen it in my life as, here's the mission that's continuing, quite frankly. Is I have a rather unique experience in my background, and there are lessons that I absolutely believe can be learned from that, and are transferable into people's lives. And so that's the way it's gone ever since then, as and I've had wonderful opportunities, and doors have been open to me. And so I'm very thankful. And oh, by the way, in that, I do witness for my faith.
Amen. Amen. I think a lot of us do throughout the day, just as we are talking to people and communicating them, because they see in us what they really deeply want to see. And I think that's important. Go over the 5 things real quick for me again. Do what you have to do.
Yeah, the drum I beat is you do what you have to do, you do your best, you grow through everything, you keep your sense of humor, and you keep the faith. Faith in yourself, faith in your people around you, faith in your country, faith in God.
That school you went through in Hanoi, that had to be the consummate place to learn those lessons, without a doubt.
Yeah, and the other thing, the drum I really beat is that no matter what happens to us in our lives, we have the ability to choose how we're going to deal with it. What happens in our lives is out of our control lots of times. Yep. We'd like to be in control, but that's not the way it works. But we always have the opportunity, the choice. That's why the book is called The Ways We Choose. It's always a matter of choice, how I'm going to deal with what's going on in my life, the people around me, how I live my life, all of that.
I think that's incredibly important, because if you choose the wrong thing, it is going to magnify and blow up in your face, without a doubt.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just like you chose the wrong direction when you saw that missile coming at you.
Yep. Yep.
And it all started. You made a bad choice.
Made a bad choice, and it all started that way. Yeah, but in truth, I wouldn't change anything about my life. I was in a conversation the other day with a couple of guys, and one of them said, when I was 20 years old, I could never have written down what was going to happen in my life. And I think that's true for all of us. We could never have predicted what's going to happen in our lives. And as I look back on my life, it's just so clear why these things happened to me, what happened to me, that it scares me sometimes. I mean, literally, I don't want to get on my soapbox, but I can see God's hand in my life so clearly that it scares me. I mean, I know why I was shot down. I was shot down. Why was I shot down? So I'd be right here talking to you right now about these very subjects. I mean, it's very clear.
I don't know if you ever stop to think about it, but to think about the number of lives that you have impacted. And I know one of the things that we talk about a lot, and we're going to talk about 988 in just a second as we wrap up the show. But I think about it in terms of, it really highlights with veteran suicide, but it's about saving veterans' lives, because not everybody commits suicide, although that's very much a choice. And we are bringing that number down, but not fast enough. But it is a problem, and it is Where I'm going, oops, I got 10 seconds. Where I'm going with that is that stories like yours are the kind that can motivate people, that can make a difference in their lives. But I wonder how many people have contacted you and said, hey, that made a difference. That made an impact.
Well, not to be immodest, but a lot.
Come on, you're a Naval Academy grad. You guys don't have any modesty.
Right. Yeah, I get emails frequently from people that have heard me, some of them 20 years ago.
Wow.
Who can recite something of what I said or of those 5 points. I mean, I got an email from a woman who had those 5 points on a Post-it note stuck on the mirror in her bathroom, so that every time she went into that bathroom, she would see those 5 points.
Guess what? I have that same thing on my bathroom mirror.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, I thought your 5 points were what your name was and where you kept your wallet. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm being rude, aren't I? But no, that's incredible to think about. People who take something, and you talk about 5 very simple points that anybody who hears them goes, well, yeah, those are kind of obvious. But it takes somebody to verbalize that, to help understand what it takes to take that very next step. Or to take, let me say it this way, to take it in a positive manner, because one of your choices could be to bury yourself in a bottle. And I certainly drank too much, to the point where we were heading for a scuba diving Saturday morning thing, and I'm driving up with one of the military had just gotten into drug and alcohol counseling, and I'd made a comment about having too much to drink the night before, and part of it was, yeah, it was in Hawaii, and yeah, it was a beautiful place, but I was alone outside of my squadron mates. And he made the comment, do you think you drink too much? I looked at him and I said, well, you're the expert. You tell me. And he just didn't answer. And I know where I realized later where he was going. It's you've got to admit you had a problem. And I'm hoping that his response was, by not saying anything, you don't really have a problem. Or at least a problem.
You're hoping.
Yeah, at least I was hoping that was the case. But you've always got a choice. There's the bottle, there's drugs. The ultimate is obviously suicide. But there's more esoteric choices, the choice that you didn't make. I'm going to pick on our producer, Nathaniel Smith, who, as a young man has started his own company. And that had to be a little bit scary as opposed to having a paycheck that was assured every week from some company. But at the end of the day, working for somebody else, and unlike you, he didn't have a nice Navy pension coming in, and at least the lights weren't going to get turned off if he didn't accomplish what he was doing. But we all have these opportunities to make these choices, and I think it's when you can read something, when you can take somebody who said, I've been through, the Hanoi Hilton is a nice way of saying hell. And you can come out on the other side of it better. And we've got about 5 seconds before we're going to take a break or come back. We're coming back from a break. I never can keep it straight.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. Thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Now, let's continue this conversation.
Well, having Dave Carey aboard, U.S. Navy Captain Leader, amazing thing again. Go to davecarey.com and take a look. You also want to order his book on Amazon, The Ways We Choose. It is an outstanding book. And for those Marines, we'll get it autographed in Crayola. And he's got a DVD as well. We've been talking about this, and it is so important because what we're really talking about is the lessons he learned in Hanoi are so powerful and exaggerated that they are lessons that we need to learn today. And as you said on the break, you have had literally unbelievable numbers of people write you or email you and say, this made a change in my life.
Yeah, and some of it's incredibly simple. It's the difference between starting your own company, like our producer Nathaniel Smith has done, but some of it is even more important. And I think about some of the people that I know who have made the ultimate bad choice and committed suicide. It's and there's some place I'm going here, but it'd take too long to set up, at least in my mind. But talk a little bit about. I'm sorry. Oh, so we've got 2 minutes. So share with us, Dave, your kind of final thoughts as we wrap this up, and then we'll turn it over to Jim to close us out and to talk about 988.
Well, I guess I would want to encourage listeners. I know that this is primarily a military listening audience, and I would say two things to you. First of all, what you are doing in the military is learning things that are highly valued in the rest of our culture and our society. The idea of being able to take responsibility, make decisions, get a job done, all of those things that seem rather mundane once you've been in the service for a while are highly valued qualities in the civilian world. And the second thing I would say to you is that no matter what you've heard or what you hear, we live in the greatest nation that has ever existed on the face of the earth. This is a land of freedom. This is a land of opportunity. This is a land of choice. This is a land that they're kicking the doors down trying to get in. This is the land. And we are inundated these days with what's not good about our country. And I would urge you to keep that in perspective, because nobody's going to keep it in perspective for us.
No.
This
Boy,
is the land.
That's for sure. And Dave, would you say to a young man or woman who's interested in the military or who's graduating, this is a place to get started with your life?
Yes, I would. In a heartbeat, I would tell them. I would encourage them that this is a step to take.
I got to tell you, from a man who survived the Oriskany fire, who survived 5.5 years as a POW, beatings, torture, I'm sure there were times in your life when you were like, whoa, but you were responsible. You learned these lessons and to do what you had to do to thrive and survive, and you guys did. So I'd like to close us out with a prayer. Lord God, we thank you for men like Dave Carey, and we thank you for your protection around all of our active duty military and for our EMS, for our first responders, those who go forward at the point of the Spirit so that we may be protected, so that we may have these freedoms. Thank you, Lord God, for protecting them. Thank you, Lord God, for protecting our veterans and protecting our rights in this nation. Thank you for all you do. We appreciate it. We love you. We thank you in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Dave,
Amen.
It's always a joy to talk to you. It's always a joy to be with you. And we want you to come up here to Dallas to speak to Sea Cadets and speak to other organizations to help young people. We want to get your message out into the hands of young people and teachers about doing the way we choose to be responsible and to thrive, not just survive. Thank you, Dave Carey, for being on board. Thank you for being a blessed friend. Thank you.
That's my pleasure, Jim. Thank you for having me here. God bless your work. Great to see you again.
Great to see you, buddy. Again, go to davecarey.com and get Dave's book and get Dave's DVD. It's going to make a difference in your life, even if you have to have it autographed in a Crayola.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for Chuck. Thank you also. Hey, pay attention. 911 is the new
988. 988.
The new suicide prevention number.
No. It's our veteran support number. It's more than just suicide, but 988 for veteran service.
All right. Thank you for being on board with the Veterans Impact Show. This is Jim and Chuck. We'll see you next week.